We are going to have a fantastic time. Let me go ahead and just get a little bit of information for you folks. So for those of you who are not familiar, which if you are not, you are living under a rock, the Nation of Animation podcast, Ryan is half of that, is a cartoon book club podcast for all ages. Joining lifelong cartoon fans Ryan Stevens, who's presented before you, and Brooke Aaron Smith, who is the other half, who has prior obligations today. Every other week as they discuss classic cartoons through a modern lens and celebrate everything cartoons have to offer. And let me go ahead and also give you folks a little bit of insight about Ryan, as we were speaking about right before. Some of it might be a little bit out of date, but it still holds true nonetheless. I implore you to go to Ryan's website, where you will see a picture that it looks like Ryan is in witness protection program right now from how different they are from the headshot. Ryan Stevens received their BA in fiction writing and his MA in theater at the University of South Carolina, where they studied classical theater, modern theatrical stage conventions, Shakespearean theory, clowning, and improvisation, and received their MFA in playwriting from UCLA in 2020. That's just a short, abbreviated script, but Ryan, thank you again for joining us. And for those of you, I'm just going to give my own personal take on the Nation of Animation podcast. You do so much in your regular life as far as work and all the stage production and the classes you teach. When do you find the time to actually watch cartoons? Because from every other week, you two will watch a full movie, you'll watch a full series, you'll watch a full season, and as somebody who does these retrospectives every 3 weeks, watching one full season of a half-hour show with 10 episodes is a really daunting task. You have to make time in your personal life to really complete watching these series.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that for a lot of them, either Brooke or I will have already seen them a lot from just like growing up or just like in our past. So in a way, we would prepare for every episode our entire lives, because we will have watched a lot of Clone High. We will have already watched a lot of Jimmy Neutron or what have you. So usually for at least one of us, it's more review than just like brand new information, which helps. And the other thing is that, well, I mean, this is sort of what we watch, with dinner or, with any downtime we have. We usually make sure to carve out screen time together to watch whatever we're talking about next, which is why whenever we get a movie episode, it's a nice break. But for the TV series episodes, it's very much like, okay, what are we committing to for an hour or so every single day for the next few weeks? Yeah. So it definitely is a juggling, a time management skill for sure.
So when did you folks start the podcast?
We started in late 2020. When I was living in Chicago during, the pandemic, pre-vaccines. A lot of friends and I were just sort of creatively stifled, not a lot going on. A friend of mine connected me to Justin Borak, who is also a podcaster, used to be based in Chicago. He's in at WVU studying theater right now for his MFA. He runs a podcast network called Audio Mint. A mutual friend of ours connected me with him, and we started talking about like potential topics for a show. And I floated this idea of like a cartoon rewatch show that was more than just like, remember when this happened? That was cool. Although, to be fair, we do also do a fair bit of that. We'll confess to that. But wanting to have a more sort of like historical or, to be really navel-gazing, like anthropological view of it. Like, why do we like these shows? What is their cultural impact? What does their fandom talk about? And so my girlfriend and I, Brooke, who is, equally scholarly and invested in these shows, we thought that it would be a fun project to do together, something to coordinate with from across the country. I was living in Chicago at the time, like I said. She was living in Wisconsin at the time. And then the rest is sort of history. We just started slow. We started Bob's Burgers with our first episode, and then Amazing World of Gumball was our second, and then we just started picking them one at a time, sort of alternating. Sometimes we do an episode based on a theme, like the Oscars. Yearly we do an episode for that. This year's Oscars episode is actually our first Lost episode, a piece of Lost media, in that something went wrong with my mic and the whole file got corrupted, so we didn't do an Oscar episode this year, but it will be extra special when we come back next year.
I love that you have your own Lost episode lore of your own channel.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it was a very historic get for us. Like, finally, something that is we can talk about in such hushed tones.
And it's funny because you used two words that I was going to exactly say between your folks' podcast and just these little interviews I do. I don't know if you're familiar with Saturday Night Live at all, but the way I remember when I first stumbled onto your folks is that I felt the exact way you said about how it was scholarly. Like, you guys give the history about it. You'll really go into depth about, well, what are the social dynamics? What are the dynamics about now compared to then? Like, I was listening to your Clone High one recently, and that one really made me think about it in a different perspective from just a lot of social and cultural things that went on. And then I feel like mine, when I re-listen to mine, I think, wow, I'm really cultured too. I'm really smart and intelligent. I listen to mine, and it's that Chris Farley when he's interviewing Paul McCartney for a show. He's like, you remember when you did with the Beatles? Yeah. That was awesome.
That was so cool. Yeah.
And I feel like that's just how I do it. But that's why I love listening to, especially your folks' podcast, because it's so much of a different tone where it's approachable and that I feel I can hop in. I don't have to be the smartest person listening to it. Not to say that there aren't smart people listening to it, but you folks make it very accessible to listen to while still talking about a little higher brow things than I could ever imagine talking about.
Thank you. That's very, very kind of you to say. It's great to hear. Well, the good news is if you're one of our discerning listeners, you are smarter than the average bear. We have the smartest listenership in podcast. Take that to the bank. So congratulations on being the discerning cartoon fan. I think it's always worth considering. Something we always talk about is like who made this and when did they make it, and like under what conditions are there like perspectives shown in that. Like Clone High was a really neat example because I don't know, when I first watched it in college, which is already like a decade after it first aired, I didn't think anything of it. It was just another show. But rewatching it now is very much like, okay, this is kind of a time capsule of like what early 2000s humor was and what pop culture was and how these kinds of stories were told. Like what it's parodying, that particular kind of teenage soap, doesn't really exist anymore. It has the target has changed, so it's sort of this like curious academic study to be like, okay, what did Clone High think was funny about the then modern day, and how we drifted away from that? It's easy for me to like fall too much into like thesis talk, so I'll try and stay focused. But thank you for the kind words.
Well, yeah, and you know, I was listening to what you were saying in the Clone High one. I've never seen Clone High personally. I've seen clips of it online because that's a show, and it's one of these shows where, especially, I feel like the 2000s shows are becoming so a part of meme culture. I can't tell you how many memes I see of compilations, 15 minutes of compilations from Drawn Together that can't be shown today.
Speaking of shows made in their time, yeah.
But it's funny because there's almost this sort of renaissance of, you know, we had cartoons from look at He-Man, how the history of that, but now we're getting to the point where the 2000s, I don't want to say it just because I don't want it to come from my mouth, but the 2000s were 20 years ago. And just in that short time, how much comedy has changed, how much cartoons have changed, not just the animation, the physical side of it, going from hand-drawn to Flash, but just the content, because cartoons are sort of the last bastion. Like, you look at South Park, which may have had that sort of humor grandfathered in, and if you're not if you had a cartoon like South Park come out today, I mean, you'd be writing the line whether it can get not let alone approved, but if it would fly in today's society. But something like South Park can still get away with the most heinous, offensive, and I say offensive, quote unquote, you know, maybe to the public, things imaginable. But just because it came from another time, it's still widely accepted today.
Yeah. I mean, I think South Park's a really neat example because even South Park isn't South Park anymore because it still airs and it's been going for so long. Its identity has changed a lot. And you can see how like Matt and Trey's humor has sort of shifted and their politics have shifted a lot since like the heydays of the show. You know, a few years ago, they had an episode apologizing where they like the characters apologize to Al Gore for not believing in Man Bear Pig, which is like an allegory for global warming. Like South Park is informed by the real world, which has also been informed and responded to South Park, and it's this really curious way that like culture influences people and people influence pop culture, and there's this the interaction between those is really fun to study, even when it is also like, my God, 20 years of South Park, it can't be, but it is.
Yeah, and. You know, as you were saying, the one thing that I think South Park has to its benefit, and I'm sure anybody who's seen South Park extensively has seen that short documentary on how they're able to come up with episodes, and they wait pretty much until the last minute to turn in an episode, where even Comedy Central doesn't know the content that they're going to be putting in and barely has enough time for censorship or anything. And how I think it was that South Park had believed that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election that
Yes.
year.
Mhm.
And when Trump won, they had to go back and change everything. So it kind of works in the benefit where, yeah, you know, we can change anything. We can have our opinions differ at the last minute. We can kind of go on whatever's happening at the time. But at the same time, it must be very stressful because if they had just, you know, they had that Hillary Clinton episode ready, so they couldn't put it out. So they had to, or we got to rework at least half the episode.
Right. It's such a fascinating. I mean, the turnaround must be nerve-wracking for the people who make the show because it's always down to the wire by design. It is last minute. But also it does give you the freedom to swerve when like events change or when like new ideas strike. But again, also the burden of having to be responding to real-world events at all times must be an incredible burden for them because like, okay, what happened in the news this week? What horrible thing do we have to make jokes about this week? And it's like you can't just like, I want to do a character study of Cartman. It's like you can't. The Suez Canal thing happened. We have to make an episode about that. Yeah, I mean that's like what's so unique about that work style for them is that they can, and at this point, kind of have to be constantly ripping stuff from the headlines.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's a perfect way to talk about how earlier in South Park, I mean, you would get exactly that. Today, Cartman rides a roller coaster and he, you know, he won't let his friends get on next to him because he thinks it's weird. It'll be something like that, and you can run that episode, and that's sort of an evergreen premise, but exactly what you're saying when it's something political, when it's something that's happening in the world, when it's an earthquake or a tsunami, you sort of feel compelled to have to address that. You can maybe put it off for another week, but at that time, after a week, just with the way society and social media and the news is, that might not be relevant anymore. And that's sort of a scary topic. I mean, it's like all things with comedy, with any sort of creative endeavor, you sort of have to strike on the moment unless your content is really evergreen.
Right, and that's why I think a lot of other shows that don't have the tight turnaround probably aim more for evergreen stuff, and if they do something that's more topical, then it's, I don't know, something broader, or something they plan ahead of time. Like if a show is going to do like an episode about the election, they know the election is in November of every 4 years, so they can build something around that and be general about it. The thing about like South Park with its current events is I think that like sometimes shows teach us how to watch them, and sometimes audiences will sort of influence how shows are made. The other example that I think of is like Rick and Morty, and how early seasons tried to split the familial stuff between Rick and Morty, and this one's a parody of Predator, this one's a parody of Doctor Who, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually those like storytelling ideas become like necessary, so every episode has to be like a specific one-to-one parody of something else for that show. And they like, you know, with some creative shakeups, there's been some changes in there, but there still is this aspect of like, well, at what point does a show become the fans' idea of it, and how much can you deviate from that as creators without the fans being like, this isn't what we want anymore? Like if South Park did a full season without any current events, but it was still, you know, Kenny still dies every episode, Cartman and Butters are still getting into it, it's still technically South Park. But if it didn't have that thing that we've come to expect of it, then the audiences are going to feel that dissonance and be like, where's my South Park? Where's the people from the headlines? Where are the celebrities?
Exactly. And you know what, though? I think people in that situation would just see it as, this is the next evolution of South Park. It's funny because people have these expectations going into these shows where when South Park was doing just the episode every week, they were, okay, this is South Park. And when they decided we're going to do a season-long episode arc, then people were like, this is the new South Park. And really, it wasn't
crazy. Yeah.
I mean, it was new South Park as far as format goes, but it also wasn't the new format. But let me tell you really quick, you know what, because you were saying it just now, you know what drives me crazy with the series? And I mean, it's not animation, but it does happen in animation all the time. This was with X-Files that I remember doing. I loved the X-Files. I don't know if you were a fan or if you had watched it at the time.
I was, yeah.
And by the way, I don't know if there was an intro to any show that scared me, that genuinely frightened me as a child, more than the X-Files. I remember.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was lightning in a bottle. Just this most like, if you're watching, you have to stop what you're doing and be like, what did I just see? What's going on here? Yeah.
And the intro, I remember the two parts specifically that terrified me as a kid was, do you remember, it was kind of that ghostly shape walking through the halls, and then the next part was like a fingerprint and a person sort of falling in, like a silhouette of a person falling into a fingerprint.
Yeah, God. The art of the like opening credits. X-Files really had it going on.
That was the
Absolute
best.
tone piece. Yeah.
And the music, it was amazing. I love that intro. But yeah, were there any intros, just jumping off really quick off that, were there any intros that always got you really excited for a TV show, even if you didn't like the show?
Like the Western opening to Dragon Ball Z, like the Rock the Dragon was the little song that they'd sing. And like watching that after school, I was like, I'm about to have the best 20 minutes of my life. There's going to be very little plot progression. It's going to be mostly dudes screaming and standing still, and then like maybe a few minutes of punching, but I'm still going to love every second of it. I mean, I do really, really enjoy the opening for, I mean, Clone High, which we just watched, has this really, like, weirdly, like, minor core, way too sincere, like, early 2000s, like, rock song, singing just the plot of the show, and, like, juxtaposing the cartoon characters with, like, anatomy textbook photos in a really strange way that, like, really captured my attention even back then. Still does today. I mean, like not animated, but like the Mad Men opening is iconic for a reason.
Yeah.
It really gives you the whole show of the guy falling out the window and people being like, "Wow, this is plot," and it's like, "No, this is tone." Just like relax with it. Yeah.
And there's something to be said about cartoons where the introductions pretty much tell you everything you need to know. Like there's something where you can go into a show that you've never seen before, but you understand it from the opening intro. And one of those ones that I absolutely loved was, maybe it didn't give the exact plot, but do you remember the Disney Channel show Goof Troop?
Yeah.
I loved Goof Troop. That is one of the underrated Disney Channel original cartoons. But it was just like father, like son. They're always number one. They're buddies. They're pals. That's like sort of the opening line. But just the singing. I remember when singing in a cartoon introduction was, you would have these people who I would think would have these amazing careers just based on their voices, and of course they would never really go on to do anything mainstream.
Right, they're just doing Goof Troop. They just, whoever belted their heart out on the DuckTales theme song. Like, where's the Grammy for that?
Yep, DuckTales and Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. I mean, these were like ballads at the time for me. Like as a young kid, I was like, wow, these must be Grammy Award winner singers. And it's like, no, these are people who may someday become elevator music singers if they're lucky. But yeah, and I think there was that famous story about the Pokemon singer who did the introduction, where you can either at one point take residuals from the episodes, or you can take a flat sum at the beginning of when you record it. And so they're like, yeah, of course I'm going to take the $12,000.
Sure. And who's ever going to care about Pokemon?
And then it ends up being the biggest cartoon on Earth for the next 15, 25 years. But yeah, I miss those cartoon intros. But what I was going to say about the X-Files is what always drove me crazy about the formatting of those shows was when, okay, you would have the alien plot, right? Like you would have, of course, Mulder's trying to find his sister. And I don't mind the monster of the week. I love that because you got so many different kinds of interesting plots during that time. But what would drive me crazy is in the beginning, Mulder would see a UFO, right? He'd see an alien come down. And he's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go find this alien. And the next 15 episodes would have nothing to do with the alien.
Don't worry about it. We'll come back to it when we want to. Yeah.
And then you get at the last episode of the season, Mulder would be like, you would see a fraction of a second of what might be an alien. He's like, I knew it. And then it would be next season. You wouldn't see anything for about 15. That drove me crazy as a kid. And just the same thing for it would do with cartoons, where it would have like a quote unquote storyline that would supposed to be run through the entire thing, but you would never hear about it. You would never see about it, maybe once or twice a season. That always drove me crazy. Like Ninja Turtles would sometimes do that with, oh, we got to get Shredder. He captures Splinter. 8 episodes later, Splinter just shows up in random episodes during the time, and then at the very end he's like, oh yeah, there he is, Splinter's captured. That always drove me. Was there ever like anything like maybe format or something else that drove you crazy about what cartoons would do, especially when you were watching week to week? Because people now are spoiled where you can hop to the episodes like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna skip to the last episode, not miss anything during the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reason behind that is like, one, you got to make a whole season of TV. And these days, most TV seasons are much shorter. You get 10 episodes on streaming or whatever, and that's your whole season. Gone are the days of the 20-episode season where we just got to keep plates spinning. I was like, well, we can't have them fight Shredder yet. We have to fill 17 more episodes.
And those
so
would
bear
run
with us.
every day a lot of the time. They would run Monday through Friday.
Yeah. And you also have to assume that kids might have missed the last episode. You have to reestablish the overarching thing every episode or two, so that if you missed last week but you see this week, you still know that
Hmm.
Splinter's been kidnapped or whatever. I mean, I think that always frustrated me as a kid, just because I was like, well, just go do it. Like, what are we waiting for? I didn't understand the narrative reasons behind it,
Yeah.
but that inertia of just like, why are we just sitting around?
Hmm.
I think a lot about the like 90s Spider-Man cartoon, where a lot of times, he'd beat the villain and then like they'd run away and he'd be like, I'll get you next time. And then the next episode he's like, all right, time to go on a date with Mary Jane. It's like, you just go get him. Like, you're
Yeah,
Spider-Man. Go look
chronologically,
for
you
him.
want it to be like you want him to remember it the same way that you did.
Right.
And it
It's
never
like,
works that way, which I agree. It was like, I mean, as a kid, you're like, well, I'm watching it right now. Why doesn't he remember? And you have no idea there's like 40-year-olds smoking cigarettes in a room, writing like, all right, should Spider-Man hug Mary Jane this time or should he fight the Rhino next time?
it's not episodic to me. I'm like, no, this is the whole story. Go continue, please.
Exactly, exactly. But was there ever a show that excuse me, was there ever a show where it like had a cliffhanger that it never addressed for you that just drove you crazy?
Let me think, because I'm sure there were. There was one. Oh, it's on Spider-Man 2. They like made a sequel series called Spider-Man Unlimited,
Hmm.
where he like went to a different planet. Spider-Man goes to it's called Counter Earth. There's an Earth on the other side of the sun that a comic book supervillain made. It's like he's like a Fantastic Four villain. He has nothing to do with Spider-Man in the comics. So they're like, yeah, forget it. And then I think the main thing was like, we want to do Spider-Man. They wanted to do a Batman Beyond, but for Spider-Man. So they didn't put him in the future. They just put him in space. But then they just like stopped making the show when he's like in the middle of fighting Venom and Carnage, like in the middle, like season one ends like, and now we can't wait to fight. And then they just did not make a second season. And it's just like, give me something, give me an episode, or even do like a Simpsons, like edit it where they like Venom and Carnage are like, we're sorry, Spider-Man, forgive us. And then it's like a title card that says Spider-Man returned to his home planet, and then we go home happy. But I remember that one being like very frustrating as a kid. I'm trying to think if there are any others that really stand out as being like unsatisfying.
I mean, I'll say one that wasn't unsatisfying that it left me, and of course, I mean, at the time we had no idea that if a show was going to be canceled or what canceled even meant. But I remember watching the Sonic the Hedgehog Saturday morning cartoon, where it was the one with Princess Sally, and it was the really good one. And I don't know if you saw it or not, but basically it's Sonic fighting the most evil version of Dr. Robotnik ever, and he was very scary, and he wanted to roboticize the planet, all the things you see in the games, but at a very
Right.
serious level. And at
Yeah,
the
that
end,
cartoon was really like with the edgy Sonic.
that's one of my favorite versions of Sonic, and Jaleel White, the original voice of Sonic, I mean, top of the tops. But I remember at the very end, Sonic saves the world. Robotnik presumably dies in the end of that one. His cohort Snively says, oh, I'm going to come for you, Sonic, and I've brought a friend. And you see these red glowing eyes. And it was supposed to be Ixis Nagas, who was in the Sonic the Hedgehog Archie comics at the time. But people were thinking, is this Metal Sonic? Is this Knuckles? Is this, Robo Robotnik, somebody?
And the answer is it's nothing.
Yeah,
the show's over.
it's never gonna happen is the answer. It's never gonna. I mean, I think they're actually doing not the original cast, but fans who have contacted some of the original art directors and writers and things, and they're working in unison with them, are actually going to do a season 3, which is cool.
Wow, that's
and
crazy.
yeah, especially the Sonic fan base, they have a fervent desire to make more Sonic content, especially of the things they grew up with as kids. And look, no matter how great it is, I'm still gonna want that official. I want to see it on TV with commercials and still live that out.
And like commercials of the time, like they need to cut to Surge and like a period appropriate Burger King commercial and like Skechers light ups or whatever. Like the whole thing needs to be constructed as it would have been.
Did you have so for me personally, I mean, I don't think a lot of people on the channel know this because one, not a lot of people watch my channel, and two, my favorite cartoon character of all time is Sonic the Hedgehog. I love the lore. I had Ken Pontac, who wrote for Sonic Forces, Sonic Generations on last time. He was great. He was super cool. If anybody wants to check it out, that's just a shameless plug here.
I'll be checking that video out right after this.
And he did, yeah, thank you. The more you know. Let's have that fly across the screen too. If I had editors, we definitely would. I mean, as somebody who grew up in the same time, I'm assuming as we grew up in the same time as each other, were you a Cartoon Network or a Nickelodeon or a third-party Disney Channel kid?
I think of the three, I was most Nickelodeon, like if I had to choose, but I
Hmm.
really was not going for a team. I was really just an omnivorous little cartoon consuming indiscriminate. If it was on to watch, Disney was lowest of the three. I will admit that there was
Hmm.
something a little too. I mean, it was like safe. It was like my mom knows Mickey Mouse. I want to watch that. I want to see Street Sharks. I want to
Oh, I
watch
love
like
was
Johnny
Street Sharks.
Bravo.
Was
Yeah,
Street Sharks on Nickelodeon?
I don't think it was. I think Street Sharks was on like an affiliate, like Warner Brothers,
ABC
some
or
other
some,
channel,
yeah,
ABC
some
or something.
weird
Yeah.
thing. And that's a great point because I remember I did a video on this too. I think the most at that time when I was growing up and I was kind of there were three channels, the three channels we're talking about right now. I think the only one on Disney Channel I was interested in that wasn't iCarly was the Weekenders. I don't know if you remember the Weekenders.
Oh yeah, I remember the
I
Weekenders.
love the
Yeah, that
Weekenders
was really
because
fun.
it did two things that I loved. One, it was a cartoon, and two,
Hmm.
it was sort of these older, maybe, maybe 12, 13, 14 year olds, but they weren't relationship obsessed with
Right.
the shows of that age. They weren't, I mean, they would be like, "Oh, I want to be popular." But by the end of the episode, they would find out, "You know what? It doesn't matter. I'd rather be with my friends." I really
Hmm.
liked that. But I agree with you 100% because I feel like Cartoon Network still blurred that line between we're going to have new cartoons, but we're also going to be a lot of we're going to have respect to the past a lot, maybe almost a little too much, where you'd still see elements of what would become Boomerang mixed in with new Cartoon Network
Hmm.
shows. But Nickelodeon, I remember, had things like Doug, which Doug and Hey Arnold. Those two shows alone were game changers for kids who were
Hmm.
coming out from those 9, 10 to like 11 and 12-year-old shows.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing, so like Doug and Harold and the Weekenders too are these neat ideas of like, well, it's like an animated sitcom basically. You're meeting regular characters, they go on regular, sort of manageable, mostly realistic adventures. Even though Doug has Quail Man every now and then, and I was always very excited when when
Yeah.
Quail Man would show up.
Tell me,
Um,
tell me that you also had the idea that you thought was super original. Like for Halloween one year, I'm gonna go as Quail Man.
Absolutely. It's like I could just do this. My parents like, you're not wearing underwear outside your pants. No, we're gonna get you a Superman costume or whatever. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But the Hey Arnold was great because one, it showed this really varied uh picture of a city. And I don't know where you grew up. I grew up in a very small town in South
Hmm.
Carolina, and the whole like truly metropolitan world might as well have been on the moon for me. But like Hey Arnold made it seem really like real and specific, clear, and had such a really deep bench of characters from a lot of different walks of life and backgrounds. One of the first shows I remember like depicting like class disparity and like how hard it is like being broke and poor. That was really effective for me as a kid. And when we rewatched that for Nation of Animation a few years ago, I was really struck by just how like mature and like nuanced the storytelling was in that, where they would really not be afraid to let things linger and like let Arnold just like walk home sadly in the rain and just let jazz play. And it's like, wow, they really were respecting our intelligence as kids back in the day. It was really
Exactly.
cool.
And one of the things about Hey Arnold too, you mentioned the jazz. Hey Arnold has one of the best cartoon original soundtracks that I've ever heard.
Hmm.
As far as they had, it was all jazz. I mean, you look at the intro, da 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 da. I mean, that's an iconic. Just those couple bars are
Yeah.
so
I,
amazing.
are the only words in the theme song "Move It, Football Head," or does Helga say something before that? I remember that's how it closes, but I think that's it.
I think that is it. But you
Hmm.
know who I love? Okay, I wanted to do. I'm gonna let folks know who watch the channel, and we're gonna get some comments in a minute because we have a lot of them.
Cool.
Most of them are about your beard, but
Oh
no, just
boy.
kidding. They said we were promised pink hair.
Yeah, oh, I know. I'm sorry. I miss it too, to everyone listening.
But I'll like Hey Arnold had some incredible songs. Of course, there's the Mr. I think it was Mr. Hun, right? The Vietnamese gentleman.
Mr. Win, yeah.
Yeah, Mr.
Mhm.
Win. Sorry, Mr. Win. And he had the country song, "The Simple Things." I'll
Yeah.
take the simple things, which I
Mhm.
loved. But my favorite always was Dino Spumoni. He was
Oh
the
yeah.
lounge singer, and I loved "I'll smash those paintings on the wall, darling. I'll smash them all." He was just like this rage-fueled, intense guy.
And as a kid, I'm like, this guy's so cool.
I felt the same way. But Hey Arnold seriously had, because they didn't do musical interludes or musical parts very often. But when they did, I mean, they were legitimately some of the best of that era.
Hmm.
So let me go ahead and get some comments here. We're gonna go
All
to
right.
Lowell Lucas Jr. Let me see. Glad to see you, everybody. Thank you. He's gonna ask you. Lowell is gonna say, "Have you ever watched or reviewed Rankin Bass's traditional animated films like The Hobbit or Flight of Dragons?"
Not yet. I really want to. I'm saving them for I don't know what, but I want to make like a very special to do for Rankin Bass specifically.
Hmm.
Their Christmas movies for one thing, but their other work like their, Hobbit and such. Really want to make sure that I've done the research time and have like a take beyond this is really, really cool. But I think like the historical stuff is really valuable, but it's absolutely on the list. So
So,
stay tuned.
so what you're saying is you don't want to do what I do, where I just say this is awesome. You actually want to
Here's the
go.
thing. It's inevitable that we also do that. That is absolutely a part of the process. And it is arguably the most important because if I wasn't enthusiastic, I wouldn't ever talk about it. So
And by the way, remember this is gonna be the new buzz line for your guys thing, the Scholars Cartoon Podcast.
there we go. Yeah.
Let me take a look. Instead of Mission Hill, we got Boondocks. Instead of Duckman, we got regular shows. Things have definitely changed.
Hmm. That's interesting. I don't know if I would consider or if I would have thought to like place those particular pairings on like a continuum. I think there's something there, especially like the Mission Hill to Boondocks is really, really interesting about like how who gets a chance to like talk from that perspective and who has the opportunities there. I think broadening it is always like good and important. I think the Boondocks is it's a show that I definitely don't want to call myself an expert on, but I think is
Hmm.
really really has like really smart humor. I think the episode that made Tyler Perry so mad he canceled the show should like be put in like the Library of Congress. It should be like put on a golden record and preserved to space. It's just really smart social commentary. And then what was the other comparison?
Uh,
Duckman and regular show.
mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, very peculiar like niche of like what is regular show. It's like a stoner comedy that is also passable to be watched by like teenagers and middle schoolers.
And Duckman, you know what? I'll say this: any show, I don't care if it's animated or live, where you get to see Jason Alexander because he's so picky because of who
Hmm.
he's seen as. I think he's a great actor. Like just not even just out of Seinfeld. He's a really
No,
good
he
actor.
he has the chops. Yeah, he's a great comic and like dramatic actor too. He really has the presence.
I agree 100%. Let's go ahead and take a look. So Loa Lucas Jr. again. Disney had The Hobbit. Cartoon Network had Pirates of Darkwater, and Nickelodeon had Count Duckula. I hunted for faves. Did you ever see any of
Interesting.
those? The
I
Hobbit.
don't know about Pirates of Darkwater. I'm googling it now because what an evocative phrase. Oh, this looks very okay. So it looks very He-Man adjacent. Which, listen, if you're gonna steal, I get it. Oh no, I have no
Well,
idea
what do they
about
say?
what.
Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Absolutely,
And you
yeah.
know what I love about that? I've looked because I remember I heard that phrase and I wondered who said it. And I looked and it was like Leonardo da Vinci, and then it was somebody else like Albert Einstein, and it was somebody. I'm like, all right, this has clearly been stolen a million times. No one
Right.
even knows who to attribute it to.
It
But I guess
itself
that's the
is a stolen piece of wisdom. That's
yeah,
very, very funny.
that's amazing. Okay, let me take a look. So let's see here. Marcus Blackwell. Personally, I think Extreme Dinosaurs is better than Street Sharks because of the fact that the dinosaurs are actually dinosaurs and because of their home planet.
I get that. I respect that. I think Extreme Dinosaurs definitely had its place. I have to stick by my Street Sharks though, because they're not just actual sharks. Because there's more like nuance. Nuance is a funny thing to say about Street Sharks, but I don't know because the premise has to work a little harder. I think being like, yeah, these sharks wear jeans and also shoot through asphalt is like, I'm in. I can do that. I'm a child. I can buy into this.
So I'm going to show. You're not going to be able to see it, unfortunately. And maybe actually our viewers aren't because my internet is, oh, there we go. So I actually had a Street Sharks toy, and I remember liking them. I love Ninja Turtles. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I had a couple. I think I had one or two Street Sharks toys. Do you remember Street Sharks at all? They were the big
I
burly sharks with human legs.
I vividly remember Street Sharks and hold them in my heart.
So what I loved about Street Sharks, I think, from the physical toy aspect, was I liked how complete they felt. Like a lot of toys, like you would have like, a He-Man toy where they would feel very skinny, where you wouldn't have a lot to grab on. Like you would have to
No,
grab them with almost like one hand to move something and the other hand to move an arm. But with
the
the
Street Sharks had heft. Yeah.
exactly, you
They
had
had girth.
yeah, I wanted a girthy toy at the time for my little kid hands. But that's what I liked about it. Like you would have to use your entire palm. Like it felt like a huge toy at the time.
Yeah, it had weight and like presence, and like playing with the Street Shark toys was, I mean, you felt like you had something. I don't know, real is probably the wrong word, but something with more dimensions than your average action figure or like Happy Meal toy. Like you were committing to the act of Street Shark because you had to use both hands.
Yeah, and And yeah, there is something to say about, especially the toys were very intimidating. I mean, you had a toy that had 50 teeth in it, and they felt like they just didn't feel like these flimsy little toys that you were dealing with. They felt like,
Yeah, they're mostly mouth. They're mostly jaws by like surface area.
and there's kind of something to be said about a character. So, I'm gonna plug it again. Just when I interviewed Ken Pontac, he was also the creator of Bump in the Night. I don't know if you've seen that show. It's a little green monster, and he lives under this little boy's bed, and he loves to eat socks and dirty clothes.
Okay, I was picturing real monsters, so I was incorrect on that.
Just as disgusting, but stop motion.
Oh, okay, even better. I recognize this little guy. I've seen this before. Yeah, I remember the little blue one too.
Exactly, squishy. And there's something to be said about a brilliant design where one of the key features, and I think Bump of the Night, it had two key features with the eyes and the mouth, but about a character that is able to be so expressive because of one feature. And Street Sharks, it was the mouth. I mean, they had tiny eyes. They had big enough eyes, but their mouths were very expressive.
Yeah.
With Bump of the Night, it was the eyes and the mouth that was very expressive. And I just...
There's some... Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, go.
No, I forget who says this. There's some like animating principle that like good character design is when every single character is recognizable just in silhouette. Where like if you black out all the details and you just see the general shape, you're like, that's Bart Simpson. That's SpongeBob. Like that recognizability is really, really key to making your character stand out. And like these little critters on Bump in the Night absolutely fit the bill on that too.
Well, there was I believe Mickey Mouse somehow copyrighted the actual circles, so they can actually sue if you have the three circles in that sort of same position. And if you look at Mickey Mouse in any sort of media, especially the more recent ones, I love those new. I like Mickey Mouse. I always like the mischievous Mickey Mouse, though, personally. I don't know if you saw the... I can't remember what movie it came before, but it was a Mickey Mouse short where him and Pete, who was at this point a Frankenstein's monster, switched brains. So Mickey was in Pete's body, and Pete was in Mickey's body, but Mickey was sort of the slobbering zombie. And there was this really funny scene where him and Minnie are out to go clothes shopping, and she goes, "Oh, Mickey, what do you think of this bikini?" And then he's slobbering because he's this big Frankenstein's monster.
And she's just like, nice.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, "Oh, I guess I'm gonna get this one."
Yeah, Runaway Brain. Yeah, with Kelsey Grammer is the voice of like the mad scientist who swaps their bodies, which is a real get.
And I remember that one being something I had never seen from Disney at the time, because I always, of course you grow up with like, my favorite growing up, my two favorite Disney things were I loved the old Mickey Mouse cartoons where he was, kind of scampy.
Sure.
My favorite of all time Disney cartoon is the Christmas Carol with Scrooge McDuck.
Oh, I wish Brooke was here to talk about this, because that is a deep favorite of hers and mine as well. But yeah, continue.
Oh yeah,
you're correct. It's great. Yeah,
and you know what I love about it? It does something Disney will never do again. It does not hold back punches. When it makes...
They tell you Scrooge McDuck is going to hell. Yeah.
Exactly. And that was, I remember, I don't know if it was the first time they really featured him as a major character. I mean, I know obviously from those comic books, but the first time they featured him in animation, I think that might have been the first time. But he was such a different Disney character than anybody had ever seen. He was greedy, money obsessed. He was shrewd. He was sort of a recluse. But he was so different from anything I had seen at the company at that time that I remember watching him, and he was just a miser. And when there were people saying, "You're going to die alone. You're going to be miserable. You are miserable now." And then he got to see, and he was repentant, where he was like, "I can't believe this is me. I long for those old days. I wish I had done things differently. I will do things differently." It was the only character I remember seeing at that time where instead of feeling like, okay, this person is going to start out, happy, and they're going to end up, wow. Like, it didn't feel like a straight line. It felt like he had all these emotions. He was so multifaceted. Right. That's what I loved. I don't know what, I mean, because you were saying you and Brooke, excuse me, you and Brooke had your own feelings about it. I mean, what did you love about that? Because that's still my favorite one.
Yeah. I mean, I think Dickens is A Christmas Carol is like already a rock solid foundation. There are like not great adaptations, but it's also so much of the work has been done for you, because like Scrooge as a character and his like trials and tribulations make a really good scaffold. And I think a lot. I think a lot about one of my like favorite performances in anything is Michael Caine in the Muppets Christmas Carol,
Oh,
where he's the only human and everyone else is a Muppet, and he plays it like as serious as if it was like Shakespeare on Broadway. Like he is like dead serious. He treats the Muppets like his fellow peers and actors, and you see this emotional core to him.
if I can interrupt really quickly, I
Yeah.
would say behind Bob Hoskins in Who Framed Roger Rabbit,
Yeah.
that is one of the best all-time human interacting with cartoon characters. I mean, they are physical, so he does have that benefit, but that's one of the all-time best interactions with cartoon characters.
Yeah, he really sells that like the little rat puppet he's talking to is a real being with
Yep.
like real with a real family. But the Disney one with Scrooge uses the Disney characters so smartly. I think the fact that Goofy is Jacob Marley at the beginning is a very funny swerve because we're not used to seeing Goofy perform that. So it's like seeing actors you know in new roles. It's like being like, oh, Goofy's playing on at the Playhouse. He's in A Christmas Carol this year. That's cool. Let's see what he has. And like seeing Goofy show range is really fun. But even so, seeing just all these Disney characters in this Victorian London setting has this sort of heightened quality to it because we recognize Mickey, we recognize Minnie, we recognize Goofy and Donald and all them, and seeing them in this context, we're like extra encouraged to care. Because when Scrooge is like threatening Mickey to fire him, I was like, no, don't fire him. That's Mickey Mouse. We love him. And then at the end, so typically the Ghost of Christmas Future is completely silent. In most adaptations, he is just like, he's the Grim Reaper. He's just there to like point out to Scrooge his own funeral.
I'll never forget that cigar too. That cigar
but
that
in this
Pete
one,
holds.
it's Pete, and he talks, and he's just a real jerk about it all. He is mocking Scrooge the whole time, which is a great move to like really heighten it and be like, no, you don't even get the dignity of a silent Grim Reaper. Like there's you will be not just forgotten but disrespected for your cruel ways.
Exactly.
It really sends the message home.
And I remember one of the things I remember about that scene specifically. I haven't seen it in a few years, but I'll never forget how deep the grave looked.
Yeah, no, it goes straight to hell.
Yeah.
Like, it is an elevator shaft into the underworld.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like it was just like you're stepping into your grave, and it felt like you were not only stepping in, but you were falling. You were falling.
It is a
depths
long
below
drop.
the earth.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, of course, you get the happy ending, which is in the original Christmas Carol. But you said a great thing about how it didn't feel like these characters were inhabiting different roles, which I think allowed them to be seen as somebody. Okay, Mickey isn't just Mickey. He's Mickey as an actor, but anything can happen to him because, and this role, what was the character's name? And
he's Bob Cratchit. I
Bob
believe, is the name
Cratchit.
of the character.
Yeah. So if something happens to Bob Cratchit in the story, you think it can happen to him here because it is Mickey, and of course
it's not Mickey.
Show. It's not Mickey though. So if in the story he were or Tiny Tim dies in the story, and in this one is Mickey's nephew.
He is going to die until Scrooge changes his ways, and then we get the great note that is in every production. They always make a meal of the line like, and Tiny Tim, who did not die.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah. blah.
Isn't that great how 100 years later they still have to include that? Like people back then were like, no, he can't.
Right? No, ever since Dickens' day, because that's in the original story too. Like he really wanted to be like, and don't worry, folks, the child is fine.